Jessica Gutierrez was born on December 3, 1981 in South Carolina, USA, the youngest child in the family. She had two sisters and a brother. The girl's parents divorced shortly after her birth, leaving her mother Debbie to raise four children alone. They lived in a small town called Edmond, a few miles from the state capital. The family lived quite modestly, since the mother alone had to provide for all the children, but despite this, they were very friendly. When Debbie worked, the older children looked after the younger ones, and in her free time, Mom tried to come up with activities for them all. On June 5, 1986, their family was spending a normal summer day. Jessica, who was 4 years old at the time, was playing in the yard with her brothers and sisters while their mother finished up chores. That evening they all had dinner together and Debbie put the children to bed. Most often, Jessica slept in the same bed as her mother, since she was the youngest, but on this day her brother had an earache, and Debbie decided to put him to bed with her. As a result, Jessica went to bed in the same room with her sisters. The eldest lay on a separate bed, and the youngest with Jessica. The next morning Debbie woke up around 9 a.m. 6-year-old Rebecca, who was sleeping in the same bed as Jessica, walked into her mother's room and asked her to make her cereal for breakfast. The woman got out of bed, left her room and immediately noticed something was wrong. The front door, which she always locked before going to bed, was open, and the dog, who lived outside, was running around the house. In addition, a curtain rod and curtain were lying under the window at the back of the house, and the protective mesh had been removed from the window itself. Debbie went to the girls' room, but Jessica wasn't there. The woman also saw papers scattered on the floor. She asked the older daughters where their sister was, and in response, Rebecca said, "She is not there, the man with the beard took her." The mother thought her 6-year-old daughter was just joking and went to look for Jessica. She admitted that the girl could have gone outside to play, but she was not there. The woman also looked around the entire house, hoping that Jessica was just playing hide and seek. Realizing that she was nowhere to be found, the mother ran back to the girl's room and began demanding that Rebecca tell her where her sister had gone. The girl kept repeating the same thing about the man in the magic hat, and Debbie began to lose her nerve. She started screaming and asking why Rebecca didn't scream and call for help if someone was taking her little sister away from the house. In the end, the girl nevertheless told the details of what happened. According to Rebecca, she woke up in the middle of the night and saw a man wearing a wizard's hat and a beard next to their bed. He carefully picked up Jessica, who continued to sleep, and left the room with her. Rebecca, who was only 6, didn't fully understand what was happening. The girl got scared and covered her head with a blanket, thinking that it was all just some kind of bad dream. After lying there for some time, she fell asleep and the next morning she didn't even think about telling her mother about what had happened. Realizing that Rebecca was most likely not making things up, Debbie immediately called the police. Officers examined the house and came to the conclusion that the girl could indeed have been kidnapped. Most likely, the criminal entered the house through the living room window, from which the security net had been removed. After examining the place more carefully, they found one fingerprint on the outside of the glass and handed over a picture of it to the experts. Near this window, police also found a pack of cigarettes and several cigarette butts. Realizing that they were likely dealing with a kidnapping, investigators installed a recording device on Debbie's home phone. This was done with the expectation that the kidnapper would call demanding a ransom. The police listened to Rebecca's story, who repeated to them everything she had previously told her mother. This time, she added that the man unplugged the fan and night light before approaching their bed. Given that the girl couldn't see her kidnapper's face, her description was of little help to investigators, so they focused on talking to Debbie. The woman was taken to the police station, where she was asked to retell all the events of the last day in the smallest detail. During this conversation, she said that she could guess who could have taken her daughter. Just a few days earlier, she had ended a relationship with a man she had been dating for several months. According to Debbie, he was a very tough and aggressive person, and also drank frequently. The man was not happy with Debbie's decision to end the relationship, and the woman admitted that he might decide to take revenge on her. She called him directly from the police station, but he denied involvement in Jessica's disappearance. The police decided to check on him, but found no evidence that he could be related to this crime. They also checked on Jessica's father, but the man had been living out of state for a long time and could not physically be involved in the kidnapping. Analysis of the fingerprint did not produce results. The fingerprint did not reveal any matches in the FBI database. As a result, the police decided to focus on the search and went to examine the area around Jessica's house. It was located on the outskirts, and agricultural fields stretched for many kilometers from it. The police searched abandoned buildings, forests, streams and rivers, as well as any other places where Jessica could potentially be. The next day, the FBI became involved in the case. No traces of the missing girl were found. The police began distributing leaflets not only to all nearby cities, but throughout the state. In addition, the sheriff sent a plane to inspect the area from the air. The search continued for several days. All this time, Debbie was restless. She had to look after 3 children, so she could not go on a search, and the police shared information with her about the progress of the investigation only occasionally. 2 days after Jessica disappeared, on Saturday, Debbie decided to call the sheriff and ask if they would continue the search over the weekend. For obvious reasons, the woman was beside herself with grief, and this conversation turned out to be quite tense. Debbie accused the sheriff of inaction, to which he replied that he had been looking for her daughter throughout the night and added that if she accused him of something, he would call off his people and they would simply forget about this matter. Due to the fact that Debbie's home phone still recorded all calls, she saved this recording. The woman continued to believe that the police were practically not searching for her daughter, which is why she was increasingly losing hope of finding her every day. This went on for several months until a rather unexpected turn occurred in this matter. 10 weeks after the girl's disappearance, the police found themselves in captivity. A local man snuck into someone else's house, but the owner used a weapon and scared off the criminal. The man then stole a van and drove to neighboring North Carolina, where he broke into the home of a sleeping woman and sexually assaulted her. Soon after this, the criminal was arrested and his fingerprints were entered into the database. Once they were there, investigators got a perfect match. His prints matched those at the scene of Jessica's abduction. This man was Thomas McDowell. As soon as Debbie found out about this, she immediately told the police that she knew this man. The woman knew Thomas through relatives, and just a few months before Jessica disappeared, she hired him to do work on the site. During the 2 days spent in the house, the man built a shed and repaired the shed. A notable fact is that Thomas had a beard and always wore a tall cowboy hat. This suggested that Rebecca, who had only glimpsed her captor in the darkness, might have mistaken the headdress for a wizard's hat, like the ones she had seen in cartoons. However, one problem immediately arose. Despite the matching fingerprints, the police felt that this evidence would not be enough to bring charges. Firstly, they still did not have Jessica's body, which meant they could not be 100% sure that she was not alive. Secondly, there could be a theoretical explanation for the presence of Thomas's print on the window that is not related to the abduction. Considering that he worked on the grounds of Jessica's house for 2 days, the print could have been left during this work. However, this probability was very low. When examining the house, forensic scientists noted that the print had not been exposed to external factors, such as weather, that could have visually altered it. In addition, Debbie constantly washed this window, on which the imprint was left. When her children were walking in the yard and wanted to say something to their mother, they ran up to him with their hands and shouted. Considering that the children's hands were often dirty with something, come and take this into account. Thomas had worked on their property for at least 6 months prior to the abduction and there were no other prints there when police examined him. This indicated that the man almost certainly could not have left a print during his work. Debbie added another interesting fact. She said that when Thomas was working on her property, she accidentally slammed the door from the outside, leaving the keys inside the house. As a result, she had to climb through that very window, and all this happened in front of Thomas. But all these arguments did not convince the police, and their opinion remained unchanged. They continued to believe that there was not enough evidence against the man. Thomas was found guilty of assaulting a woman whose home he broke into and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Debbie was heartbroken that the police refused to charge him with kidnapping, but she couldn't do anything about it. Also in 1987, something else happened. Thomas's cellmate contacted the police and told them that the man had confessed to him of committing a crime. According to Thomas, he kidnapped a girl in South Carolina from her own bedroom to abuse her, but in the process of committing this atrocity, the victim bit him, and then he killed her in a fit of rage. After which he cut the remains into pieces with a machete, took them to a field and threw them there. Investigators in Jessica's case came to his prison, and Thomas did not even deny anything. However, he said he was ready to confess in this case if he was granted full immunity. Of course, the authorities could not do this, so the police again had to leave empty-handed. Upon learning that Thomas escaped punishment, his cellmate wrote a letter to Debbie and told her the story. Once again, the woman was shocked by the fact that Thomas was being allowed to escape justice, but she could not do anything about it. Frustrated by the inaction of the police, Debbie decided to conduct her own investigation. At some point, she found an abandoned car that previously belonged to Thomas and examined it. There, on one of the seats, the woman noticed threads and fibers of fabric that matched the color of Jessica's pajamas, in which the girl slept that night. Despite this, the police did not follow up on this lead. The fact that Debbie, without any special equipment or knowledge in the field of forensics, found particles of tissue in a car seemed strange to them. In 1987, something else happened. Kansas police contacted local investigators and said they had found a girl matching Jessica's description. Her mother immediately flew out there, but her hopes were instantly dashed when she came to look at this girl. All she had to do was hear her voice from the corridor to understand that this was not her daughter. Over the next years, Debbie gave several interviews where she complained about the police inaction and ignoring the obvious suspect, but this did not bring any significant results. In 1990, Jessica's case was featured on a popular television program dedicated to unsolved crimes. This made it possible to attract a new wave of leads, but they all led to a dead end. A year later, Jessica became the first missing child in South Carolina to have a supposed portrait taken as she grew up. Considering that it was the early 90s, such technology was still in its infancy, and in theory it could help identify missing people, taking into account age-related changes in their appearance. Despite all this, since then the case has remained frozen for many years. In 2007, 21 years after Jessica disappeared, her mother again publicly accused the local police department of inaction. This time, for the first time, she provided reporters with a recording of that very conversation, where the sheriff told her that he could recall his people and forget about this matter. Reporters contacted the sheriff, who said that he had not stopped investigating this case over all these years. He added that after that conversation with Debbie, he not only did not recall his people, but also assigned even more officers to this investigation. Debbie also complained that she tried for years to get other agencies involved in the case, but the local prosecutor blocked her initiatives every time. Also in 2007, they reviewed the case and confirmed that they did not have sufficient grounds to bring charges against anyone. At the moment, this is not possible. Several more years have passed since then without any progress. In 2014, a rather interesting event occurred. The sheriff was charged with charges related to fraud and bribery. The man was fired and received 12 months in prison. 2 years later, the prosecutor was arrested for driving drunk and getting into an accident. For this, he was fined $1,000, and the man left his position in 2021. 35 years after Jessica's disappearance, a new sheriff named Jay Kuhn reopened the investigation into the case and requested the assistance of a special FBI unit that specializes in finding missing children. They allocated 50 agents to this case. Researchers began to work through this case almost from scratch. They re-spoke with everyone who appeared in the case file, reviewed the available evidence and leads, and tried to find some new leads. In the course of this painstaking work, they not only came to the conclusion that Thomas McDowell had shaved off his beard and long hair, but also stopped wearing a cowboy hat, although he had practically never taken it off before. In addition, during those years, Thomas smoked cigarettes of the same brand that were found near the window in Jessica's house. However, experts could not find traces of DNA on these cigarette butts. Most likely, they were destroyed during the initial analysis, which that year was far from perfect. Of course, all these factors acted only as additional evidence of Thomas's involvement, and the main trump cards in the hands of the investigators were the fingerprint and the testimony of the cellmate. Ultimately, detectives decided that this would be enough to take the case to trial, and Thomas was finally arrested in January 2022. The man, who was 62 years old at the time, refused to admit his guilt, and preparations for the trial lasted for several years. It began only in January 2024, and Thomas's lawyers tried to challenge the available evidence. They insisted that the imprint on the glass was left while the man was working on their site. The lawyers also pointed out that Rebecca saw a man wearing a wizard's hat and questioned whether the girl could have mistaken it for a cowboy. But experts invited by the prosecution pointed out that the print was clearly fresh, and over many months it would have either been erased or subject to changes from exposure to weather. A former prisoner also spoke at the trial, repeating a story Thomas told in prison in 1987. The prosecution insisted that it was unlikely that an outsider from another state would know the details of the case. Moreover, in those years, Thomas himself demonstrated a desire to confess to his crime, but asked the police for complete immunity. The trial ended on February 8, and the jury unanimously found Thomas guilty. The man, who was 63 years old at the time of sentencing, received a life sentence. Debbie, who had been confident of his involvement since the early years of the investigation, had conflicting feelings about the end of the case. She was glad that the culprit was punished, but she understood that Thomas could have been arrested 36 years ago. Instead, the police let him live a long life before bringing him to justice. In addition, Debbie still could not come to terms with the fact that after all this time, her daughter's remains had never been found. She, like the new police officers, does not intend to give up and will continue the search, but there is practically no chance of finding her after 4 decades. Share your thoughts on this story in the comments and don't forget to like this video if you liked it. Thank you for watching.